Hello, everyone. Welcome to MedEnt Minutes, the podcast that explores EHR optimization and how practices can excel in value-based care. I'm Megan Chapman, the Director of Marketing and Communications here at MedEnt, and today we are speaking with Bill Sintiris. He is the Chief Product Officer at AnatomyIT, and we are going to be discussing the importance of choosing the right IT vendor, especially in the healthcare industry. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Megan. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and so you know what, before we get into it, can you just give me a little bit of an overview of your background and some of the services that AnatomyIT offers?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again. I've been in IT for about 25 plus years, spent a big portion of that in building out enterprise systems for global hospitality organizations. In the last 3 years, I've been working with AnatomyIT, bringing enterprise class services to mid-market healthcare organizations. AnatomyIT is really founded around providing great IT services, but also pairing up the appropriate security services and packaging them in a way that clients can afford at this level, but also get enterprise class services that they need to protect client and patient data.
Great. Wow. And so, people might not even think that their IT vendor really needs to have that healthcare expertise, but it's really an important piece of this. So could you just talk a little bit about why that's so important and why AnatomyIT, is kind of a specialist in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've been trying to accomplish in the healthcare space is bringing IT services tailored for healthcare organizations. And healthcare organizations are unique in a number of ways. Certainly the HIPAA guidelines and compliance needs that they have, and also the urgency in dealing with patient care. We believe that there's some challenges that healthcare organizations face that they need a specific level of support, whether it's 24/7 coverage for a hospital situation, whether it's early morning coverage for an ambulatory surgical center, or whether it's daily coverage for a clinical practice. We provide offerings that help across the entire spectrum of the healthcare industry. Now, what's interesting about that is, making sure that your team and in our case, our team has a number of years of experience supporting healthcare organizations, understanding how their EMRs work, how they're protected, how data is stored and moved around through integrations. And a lot of other IT providers are really good at IT, really good at security, but they don't understand the applications that are used in the industry. And our team is very adept at learning those applications, knowing them from years of experience and working with our clients, and then making sure that we can provide the most efficient IT services to support them.
And speaking of like the IT services, I know that there is, kind of an overwhelming list of services that you guys provide here. But one of them I wanted to touch on was that you guys help with the integration with healthcare software systems like MedEnt, the EHR systems. Why is that so important?
Well, when you think about patient care and patient record handling, it's important that the IT provider really understands how those patient records are used and then how they're transferred, right? So the ability to protect a patient record in a very closed loop system, much easier. Once you start integrating with other systems and moving patient records around, you've got to understand what the impact of that is. So certainly as we work with providers that are moving records, integrating systems, we need to understand where the data is going. Is it going to be encrypted in transit? Is it going to be encrypted at rest? And then is it being backed up in a way where the data is air gapped from the running system in case there was a compromise?
Yeah, and what's kind of seems a little bit silly, but well, I like to say that people in the healthcare industry, people from doctors to receptionists to nurses, they did not go to school for IT. They went to school for healthcare and to provide, help for patients. So there's kind of sometimes almost, I don't want to say a language barrier, but it almost seems like that sometimes because we get questions here at Medent a lot where people sometimes think that we are their IT vendor and we have to kind of explain, no, we are your EHR system. You should have an IT vendor on top of having an EHR system. So could you just kind of, explain a little bit about the difference between having, you have your EHR system and then on top of that, you have your IT vendor like AnatomyIT and just some of the things that AnatomyIT handles versus something that we at Medent would handle, which is essentially their, records.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great question. And you're right. The doctors, the staff, they're focused on patient care. They don't really care how the IT works. They just need it to work on a daily basis. And then they put it all into this bucket of IT, when really there's a number of layers to that, as you mentioned, right? There's the EHR that is managing the records, and then the process flows around supporting the patient care. And then there's infrastructure, right? The plumbing of the IT, which is connecting them to the internet, which is connecting their systems, which is allowing them to do their printing, which is allowing them to integrate their systems and work on a daily basis. And really, from an IT perspective, that's what we provide is really stable, secure systems that the client can work from and connect to systems which they need to really run their patient care, like Medent, and making sure that they can access their patient records. So when you kind of break it down in a typical clinical practice, you have your connection to the internet, you have your kind of backbone of connected workstations, you have maybe even some servers locally. But the reality is that's the infrastructure required to run their IT. That's what we support, and we make sure that equipment is available, that it's patched, that it's backed up, and that and they have support when something breaks with that system. Then the next layer up is really the clinical applications, including the EMR, where the client is working on a daily basis and leveraging the underlying infrastructure to do it. But certainly the EHR is where they interact with mostly. And it is easy for them to not be able to discern where the problem's at. And I think that goes back to your first question, which is, why is it important to understand healthcare? Because we need our employees to understand what the client is going through. And if they're a doctor that is just focused on trying to provide patient care, it doesn't matter where the issue is, we're going to help them with it, right? And we're going to call their EMR provider and help solve those issues as well, or do a soft handoff where we make sure that they're taken care of, but we don't just push it back on them.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really makes AnatomyIT unique too, is just that level of kind of compassion and empathy and understanding of what the client is actually going through and why it's so important. Because, if you have an IT vendor that maybe does not specialize in the healthcare industry, when you're seeking out that support, there may be, a little bit of, I always say that language barrier. There may be a little bit of a lack of understanding of why it's so important. But it really seems that AnatomyIT gets it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we really try to understand the urgency required in healthcare, and we try to bring on team members that are really focused on, rapid response, but also building the systems that can support a healthcare environment.
And it's funny because even as a patient, I just had to have, a small procedure done yesterday. And, you're sitting there at the hospital, and if I did not have the background that I do working with Med and EHR and talking to these IT vendors as well, you almost forget that that's part of the team too. It's not just the people that you're seeing right there in front of you. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes that really kind of connects it all and brings it all together. And it's really fascinating how many hands are involved in healthcare that you really don't think about.
Absolutely. And then the number of things that can go wrong in that chain and
Yeah.
that can break down. as you said, you're sitting there as a patient, and I was recently as well having some blood work done, and I'm watching them put all of the data in the system, and I'm
Hmm.
thinking, okay, that data is really critical for them to process reimbursement. So I understand why they're doing it the way they do. Then they're connected to a set of systems that are connected to the infrastructure that they connect to. And then, most importantly, to get the reimbursements, they're sending it through the clearinghouses and making sure that they can get their reimbursements. And as we've seen this year, especially with the Change Healthcare event, anything in that chain can break and cause
Hmm.
issues for the practices. And that's where it's really important to understand that chain.
And yes, and I mean, we're seeing more and more cyber attacks and more attempts at cyber attacks, and it seems like these, that the hackers are getting finding smarter, ways to try to infiltrate that system. So I'm wondering, what are you advising your clients to do, and what can mid-market practices do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so it's a top of mind conversation in almost every client that we go into, and every prospect that we go into. And we work in a number of subspecialties in healthcare. So from critical access hospitals to ambulatory surgical centers, to clinical practices in the dental space, for example. And the dental space just recently got a warning from the American Dental Association about phishing attacks very much targeted at the small practices. And I don't think it's unique to dental. I'm just using that as an example. But this is phishing and social engineering attacks where they're trying to get through, gain access to personal data, or sensitive data, and then potentially gain access to billing records. And so the American Dental Association came out with some guidance, along with some work they did with the FBI as well as CISA, which is an organization that provides guidance on security. And they gave four really good recommendations, and I'll add a fifth as well. But the four that they said that every practice should be doing today is teaching your team to recognize and avoid phishing attacks. So, you do a lot of training on how to use your systems, but you also need to do awareness training to make sure your users and your practitioners understand what could be wrong with a message, and then when could it look like a phishing attack. And you really need to train that on a regular basis and make sure that your users understand what types of threats are coming at them and how they could be manipulated by a legit looking email and potentially give over critical access into the system. So user awareness training is the first thing that all practices should do right away.
And is that something that you would assist with, is coming up with some kind of training?
Absolutely. And so there are a number of products on the market that make it a lot easier than it used to be in the past. You don't have to sit everybody down in a room to do the user awareness training anymore. We offer solutions where they can sign their users up. The users are given a required curriculum every month, and it's usually only a 15 to 20-minute exercise on a monthly basis. And then validating that by doing basically simulated attacks, and really making sure that the end users understand what they should be looking for. And if they fall for an attempt, a simulated attack, they learn from it and they can see what they did wrong. So for sure, that is something that all practices should do right away, and certainly something we can provide.
Yeah, and I was actually just going to ask, how often should people be focused on this training? It's not just, they take a step in the door, you give them the training, and that's that, because this is kind of an ever-evolving situation.
Absolutely, and you're spot on. Right? What we see for threats today will be much different in even 30 days, right? So we recommend that they run a course curriculum of monthly training, and then an ongoing threat exploitation simulated attacks. So where you're training every month to what kind of is new and evolving, and then your IT provider or your CISO, if you're big enough, are doing simulated attacks throughout the year. So the idea is that you train it, you validate it, and then if people still find, that they're compromised through these simulated attacks, you increase the training. But typically once a month, and 15 to 20 minutes is typically what it's required. And it's well done training to where nobody has to do it at the same time. It's online. They can do it, and then they're marked complete once they do it.
Now I have to ask, it sounds monthly training. How can practices afford these, additional cybersecurity protections when their budgets are tight? Monthly training may sound expensive, but do you have any advice or recommendations on the affordability of these options?
Yeah, so I think affordability will come into play in kind of all the things that we talk about in protecting the threat landscape. So, we're talking now about user awareness training. We'll talk about, multi-factor authentication as well as strong passwords, and then making sure that they're constantly updating their business software. But all of that does require investment from the practices. And, really, historically, practices delineated IT expense separate from patient care. And I think what we're seeing is there's a real convergence of those two themes, right? Good IT practices does equate to good quality patient care. Because if you're not doing the right things on the IT side, you're not going to be able to provide patient care in case of a breach, and you could be exposing private healthcare records if you're not doing that right. So all of that kind of gets now focused on as providing quality patient care and kind of the minimum threshold of doing so. In terms of the training, I think, the good thing is that there's been, I don't want to call it a commoditization, but there's been a bit of a breadth of offerings brought to market in the cyber awareness training area, where clients can afford that. It's not that expensive to do. It's typically subscription based, and they can sign up all their users for several dollars per month, but they then get that ongoing training as part of it. So it's certainly a smaller investment than some of the other areas, but being the first one, it's probably the most critical.
Okay. And then I'm curious, are there any emerging technologies right now in healthcare IT that you're excited about? Any, new technologies that are happening in your realm that you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is the evolution of threats and the evolution of protection against those threats, right? So AI is always interesting to talk about because AI is transforming the threat landscape. But the great thing is AI is also, transforming the protection against those threats. So, one thing that we're working with our clients to do is get them all to a standard endpoint detection and response system backed by a security operations center. And for us, that is critical because all clients should have kind of it's beyond AV. It's really protecting every workstation endpoint that has access to critical patient records. And so what we're helping our clients do is make the transition from legacy AV environments and moving them to these EDR platforms to make sure that they have holistic coverage of all of their endpoints. And the next layer of that we're starting to see grow is ensuring that clients can protect endpoints that might be legacy and outdated, especially in the medical environments with some of the old and dated medical equipment that might not be modernized. And historically, what IT providers would do is basically put a moat around those environments and lock them down from a network perspective. But they lose their integration ability, and it's much harder to integrate it into the common systems. There are providers coming out now that are bringing endpoint detection and response down to those legacy medical devices, and we're pretty excited about that for our clients.
Oh, great. Yeah. And, that's a great point too, is that idea of, having a moat, around everything, but then how can you, work on that interoperability piece with connecting to other providers and practices, which is, just as important. So
Absolutely.
I do think it's kind of fascinating at how that landscape has changed. We're not necessarily building that moat anymore. Because you really can't with just how you need to communicate with others for patient care and have that care team. So
Absolutely. It's very tricky, right? So
it's a
historically,
challenge.
but absolutely, once you shut down a practices connection, they lose the ability to really drive their business and provide patient care. So it's the world has evolved to where that connectivity is absolutely required. So now the IT providers really have to do a good job about locking that down and making sure that it's done in a secure and modern way.
hmm Now, how does Anatomy IT stay ahead of the curve with all of these rapidly changing, this changing landscape of the healthcare technology?
Yeah, it's a constant evolution of that threat landscape as we talked about, and how do you stay ahead of it and ensure that you're providing your clients solutions that can help them stay ahead of it. And so, one thing that we do is we have several CISOs, so security officers on staff that work for us and for our clients. And those security officers stay very well abreast of the evolving threats, changes to the threat landscape, and then tools that we can provide to our clients to help protect them. We also have in our team, we have 7 CISSPs, which is the very top security certification. Those folks are constantly, attending, industry events, making sure that they're watching all the alerts coming from the government agencies about the new threats evolving and the targets of those threats. And then we're making sure that those folks are deploying solutions to our clients to protect against those threats. But it's always changing, as you mentioned before. I think, the key is what we do today might look different than what we do 6 months. And we have to be able to have that trust and conversation with our clients that, hey, this is the best you can do today. In, a quarterly or whatever regular cadence that we have with the client, we might be introducing new options for them to improve their security posture. And it's not because we're changing our minds. It's really because the threat landscape is changing and we're evolving the solutions to protect them.
Ah, wow. Yeah, there's certainly a lot involved. And I think one of the last things I wanted to touch on before I let you go today is the fact that Anatomy IT helps tailor this training or tailor your cybersecurity plan, so to speak, or solutions to practices. Because I think you had mentioned earlier, small practices may be facing different threats than, ambulatory services or hospitals. There's even maybe another level on top of it when it comes to things like MIPS reporting. So am I right with that? Are there different tactics that need to be taken based on specialty and size and things of that nature?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of commonalities. It's important to know the difference in how clients are operating the kind of their patient care systems, right? And so, one thing that we built in the last year is what we call the Health IT framework. And that framework is intended to provide our customers with an objective view of how their IT posture and security and maturity look like at a given point in time and how that evolves over time. So it's an objective scoring system based upon 44 pretty detailed questions that the client goes through with us and one of our CIOs, including how they're handling patient records, how they're doing the HIPAA compliance objectives. And what's unique to that is that it understands the nuances of healthcare and then can provide them a score, and then obviously targets to what to improve. So as you said, what might be important to an ambulatory surgical center is going to be different than what might be important to a clinical practice. And some examples might be the level of redundancy that you build into the systems, because maybe a clinical practice could handle a small outage, while an ambulatory surgical center has patients scheduled every day coming in for surgery that is very fixed time. They can't afford an outage. So you build those environments slightly different to make sure that they can handle the level of outages, as well as the recovery time objectives that are important for a ambulatory surgical center. Those might be different again from a hospital, which is 24/7, and they need different systems. They need different infrastructure and resiliency built in. But I would say in terms of the threat landscape, the components are all going to be the same, right? Train your users to avoid the threats, require strong passwords, require multi-factor authentication, make sure your systems are up to date with the recent patches, and then make sure you have a good backup that you can always recover from in case of a breach, because everybody's saying it, but it's worth saying again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when breaches come through, and you need to be able to respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the unfortunate, reality. And I think one thing that I kind of like to remind folks is that I try to look at this less as an expense and more as an investment. That, I do think there's some hesitation there of, well, is it really necessary? And I think this year has shown it absolutely is. I try to remind folks this is definitely an investment, and it's not just an investment for you and your practice, it's for patients too. It's important. So I guess my last question here is just what is your coverage area with AnatomyIT? I'm sure maybe some people are wondering if you're, maybe limited to certain states, but I think you guys have been expanding for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that question. So we have a national reach, so we can reach all of the U.S. We focus in the U.S. market because we know the U.S. compliance and governance guidelines, but we can certainly support clients outside of the U.S. that have maybe multi-facilities that extend beyond that. We have grown we have about 250 engineers on staff. We can provide support remotely or on site in any location in the U.S. And, we really try to take the team approach where it's typically a combination depending on the size of the practice or the healthcare facility. We may do some on site, some remote, and really leveraging our network operations center and our security operations center 24/7 to provide the best support for them.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we head out here?
No, this was fantastic. It was great to meet you and great to do this today.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope everyone takes special care of their cybersecurity here. I hope someone learned something today. And again, thank you so much for being with us today, Bill. And I hope everyone has a great day.